Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we are talking about if the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom can eventually outsell its predecessor, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. We recently just got Nintendo's latest financial report, and there's a lot of different details that have come out from this that are painting a very interesting picture that I think is worth going deeper into. But before we go further, let me point out that we are aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. With your help, it just might be possible. So the recent numbers have come in. These numbers are as of June 30th, 2023. And The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the game that Tears of the Kingdom may or may not be what we're talking about today, on the Nintendo Switch, it is the 4th best-selling game. It's currently at 30.65 million copies sold. But we should also not forget it came out on Wii U as well, and on Wii U it sold about 2 million. So Breath of the Wild, as of June 30th, 2023, has sold 32.65 million copies, which puts it as the best-selling Zelda game of all time by a significant margin. It is one of the best-selling Nintendo games of all time. Games on the Switch are just selling astronomical numbers, and Breath of the Wild is a huge, huge part of that. And typically, you don't expect the sequel to surpass its predecessor. There is this whole thing of sequelitis. Usually games don't feel fresh enough, they don't change around enough, and they just don't bring in as much of an audience. Yet despite Tears of the Kingdom being a direct sequel that is subject to this sequelitis, it has already sold 18.51 million copies. And what's insane about this number is that Tears of the Kingdom came out on May 12th of this year. These numbers are only as of June 30th. So for only about a month and a half do we have numbers on Tears of the Kingdom sales, and it's already at 18.51 million. That is more than half of the total amount of Breath of the Wild sales. So you could look at that, and at face value you might think, well, that's pretty darn good. If you give it another 6 weeks, maybe it'll be around 36 million or something. Except that's not really how it works. Games tend to sell more up front, and then over time they sort of slow down, but some games maintain some level of evergreen status and continue to sell, such as Breath of the Wild. Even this last year, Breath of the Wild sold over 3 million. So while Tears of the Kingdom is catching up, Breath of the Wild is still pushing up those numbers. This time next year, Breath of the Wild might even be above Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is currently at 31.77 million copies sold. Of course, Smash Bros. May also sell a little bit, but the point is that Breath of the Wild is continually inching up here with its consistent evergreen sales. So it's not going to be easy to catch. But while Breath of the Wild is selling a good amount year by year, even this late after its initial release back in 2017, the 18.51 million we've seen from Tears of the Kingdom is an incredibly impressive number. Tears of the Kingdom accounted for more than half of Nintendo's total software sales so far for this fiscal year, and it wasn't even out for all of it. Not to mention that in the first 3 days that Tears of the Kingdom came out, it sold about 10 million, and Nintendo came out and said it was the fastest selling Zelda game of all time, and also the fastest selling Nintendo game in the Americas of all time. Now this is extremely impressive, and with these incredible sales, Tears of the Kingdom is going to go a long way. But how far can it really go? Well, there's another game, or a pair of games I should say, that sold about 10 million as well in its first 3 days, and was not only reported to be the fastest selling Nintendo game in the Americas, but in Nintendo history for that period of time. And that was Pokemon Scarlet and Violet that only just came out this past holiday. And what's interesting about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is that it's in a similar situation to Tears of the Kingdom. It's a follow-up to a major release that came out earlier in the Switch's life cycle. So, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are Generation 9 of the Pokemon series, Sword and Shield are Generation 8. Pokemon Sword and Shield, as of the recent update, is currently at 25.92 million copies sold. Scarlet and Violet has gotten really close and is at 22.66 million copies sold. The difference is only by a little over 3 million copies. Given how fast Scarlet and Violet is sold, you would think, oh, it can totally catch Sword and Shield. And maybe it will. With the DLC on the way in another holiday season, it may get that big boost that puts it over the edge, but it still hasn't gotten there yet. And perhaps what's a little concerning about Scarlet and Violet potentially being able to sell Sword and Shield, or maybe not, is when you take a look at the sales since that initial holiday rush. So as of the holidays from last year, Scarlet and Violet sold 18 million copies. And then as of the end of the fiscal year, March 2023, Scarlet and Violet climbed to 22.1 million copies sold. But what you might notice is that since the end of March to the end of June, that last quarter, this last quarter that we've gone reported, Scarlet and Violet has only gone up by about 500,000 copies. It has slowed down tremendously. If it maintains pace this next quarter, which I kind of expect it to be about the same, it's still going to have a long way to go. Of course, the next holiday push with the DLC coming could definitely make a big difference. But it's not clear cut, it's up for debate. So yes, in a short span, less than 2 months, Scarlet and Violet accounted for about 75 to 80% of the total sales that Sword and Shield got, which sounds very similar to the situation with Tears of the Kingdom. Now, Tears of the Kingdom didn't even get to that high of a percentage, a little bit over half. Of course, the numbers we're talking about here are numbers that aren't during the holiday season. When Tears of the Kingdom gets holiday sales, it's going to see a very big boost. And we haven't heard anything about a DLC pushing this game. Maybe that happens, we're not sure, it hasn't been announced yet, they might be saving it for Nintendo's next system next year, we shall see. So really the jury's still out on this, but with how quickly sales started to slow down for Scarlet and Violet, I don't think we should be assuming that Tears of the Kingdom is going to pass Breath of the Wild. But there are some things to consider that bode well for Tears of the Kingdom's chances. One of which is that while Scarlet and Violet sales have slowed down, we should take note that Scarlet and Violet didn't see fantastic reviews. Scarlet and Violet still is marred by a number of performance issues and glitches. We've been waiting for updates to fix and improve upon this. It's a common point of conversation when it comes to these games. I don't know how much it would impact sales, but I have to imagine it's impacted things to some extent. While I enjoyed those games very much, there were issues and my experience could have been better. And maybe that's why I haven't pre-ordered the DLC for Scarlet and Violet yet. Maybe that's why I'm not super excited for the DLC yet and I'm waiting for more information. It wouldn't surprise me if this negative talk about Scarlet and Violet has perhaps impacted its long-term sales. Because while it did do incredibly well for its first few months out on the market, perhaps after that initial hype and rush, now that people kind of are aware of what the game is and the talk has been spreading, it might be impacting its opportunity to bring in even more of an audience. Tears of the Kingdom is not in that situation. Are you going to see videos and tweets or posts throughout the internet suggesting that Tears of the Kingdom isn't as good as Breath of the Wild? Sure, you're going to see those opinions out there because people have opinions. Not everyone loves Breath of the Wild. There are still people who gain quite a bit of an audience talking about how Breath of the Wild isn't that great. Yet the fact of the matter is, both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are seeing record-breaking sales. They are seeing incredibly high reviews, some of the highest reviewed games, not just on the Switch, but of all time. And Breath of the Wild won an incredible amount of Game of the Year awards, and Tears of the Kingdom seems like a shoo-in for several as well. These games are very high quality. And the world is aware of this, and the word of mouth will lead to even better sales moving forward. There's a reason why Breath of the Wild has continued to sell a few million every single year. I think the same is going to happen for Tears of the Kingdom. But a common counterpoint that many have had for Tears of the Kingdom outselling Breath of the Wild is that there's just no way it's possible because there's always going to be less people that play Breath of the Wild that will play Tears of the Kingdom. But that comes with the assumption that the only people who will play Tears of the Kingdom are the people who played Breath of the Wild. So let me point you to something that Nintendo said during the recent financial report. Consumers who have played the previous entry, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, have been the primary driver. But as the weeks have passed, we have seen that a growing percentage of purchases are being made by consumers who have not yet played that title. So what Nintendo is saying here is that yes, the bulk of Tears of the Kingdom sales come from Breath of the Wild fans, but they're seeing that more and more people are starting to buy Tears of the Kingdom without having a history of playing Breath of the Wild. So what this is suggesting is that evergreen status they were seeing for Breath of the Wild, how they're selling a few million per year, this may be applying to Tears of the Kingdom as well, to an audience beyond those who play Breath of the Wild. As the word of mouth gets out there, as the talk continues, as we share videos of our different builds and such, and talk about our different theories, more and more people are getting interested in Tears of the Kingdom and jumping straight in. And if you account for the fact that the way Nintendo designed Tears of the Kingdom, yes, it's a direct sequel, yes, you can find those story elements and connections and all of that, it is designed in a way where you can jump in without having to have played Breath of the Wild. So I would say this bodes well for Tears of the Kingdom's chances to maybe reach Breath of the Wild someday. Something else that I'll put out there is that there is a lot more Switch users now than there were during the Breath of the Wild era. So with Tears of the Kingdom being all the talk now, and more people playing Switch now than they did a few years ago, that also helps. Of course, Breath of the Wild is still a game that's well spoken of, and I think we see that with its consistent few million being sold every single year, even now, more than 6 years past its release. So I think the next few quarters are going to be very telling in terms of where Tears of the Kingdom will end up in terms of total lifetime sales, and at that point we'll have a better understanding if it can truly pass Breath of the Wild. But at this point, I think it is up for debate. It could go either way, and that's interesting, and I'm going to be keeping my eyes peeled. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andreas Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.